That's what I love about conversations. Is that they go places you don't expect.
Yeah.
And they meander.
Yeah.
And sometimes they loop back and sometimes they don't.
Sex positive culture.
It's my body to give.
Are threesome gifts a thing?
Taking a breath.
I like your bed.
Horizontal.
This is Horizontal with Lila.
I'm Lila and I'm horizontal.
I'm Kennedy and I'm also horizontal.
That'll do. Yes.
This is Horizontal, the podcast about sex, love, and relationships of all kinds, recorded while lying down. On Horizontal, we make our private conversations public for their shame-dispelling, loneliness-diminishing, and connection-cultivating properties. As listener ghostheart put it in their silver-tongued review, this is the podcast that takes you into my bed and lets your ears watch as I unzip intimate conversations. In the second half of this episode, recorded in early October on my Horizontal Does America road trip, I lie down with Kennedy in Omaha, Nebraska. Horizontal Does America was a 2-month-long, 10,700-mile road trip and recording tour that I enjoyed during October and November of 2017. And oh, how I enjoyed it. I miss being on the road. Kennedy is the young wife of my college friend, Thom. The last time I visited Thom was on my first cross-country road trip in 2009. He was single and frustrated and working as a bartender. Now he has a 2-year-old, a house, a truly delightful wife, and he teaches carpentry at a magnet high school. It's like seeing the end of a movie where you are really rooting for the tortured underdog hero, and then you get to see the movie after the credits, where the character makes a life out of what he's always wanted. I'm so happy that he's happy. At 20 years old, Kennedy is a mother, a college student, a giver of care, a seeker, and a brave and humble warrior. She is a survivor of sexual assault who would prefer not to use the words victim, assault, or survivor at all. She doesn't wish to identify with victimhood or run the risk of people seeing that as her whole identity. This is a prime example of a great sickness in our society, that a woman who is harmed is likely to be blamed for having been harmed, and then further judged and blamed for using the term victim to accurately describe the role forced upon her by sexual assault. I am appalled and deeply saddened that Kennedy should even have to worry about this. It's only a small piece of the story of Kennedy, but it is a piece of that story. And we know that silence doesn't help. We know that silence and secrecy have caused women to suffer more egregiously than their wounds ever necessitated. We know that silence and secrecy has kept many of us from receiving proper treatment for trauma. We know that silence and secrecy degrades our mental health. We don't want this to happen anymore. Not to any girls, not to any women, not to any trans folks, not to anyone. We want freedom. We want the liberty to express our sexuality in any way that feels right and meaningful and joyous to us. We want the liberty to love and fuck and marry whomever we wish to love and fuck and marry, whenever we wish to love and fuck and marry them. We have the right to speak aloud about the things that have happened to us. To paraphrase the writer Anne Lamott, and I think about this all the time, if they wanted you to write warmly about them, then they should have behaved better. My wish for us is that we continue unabashedly to put forth our own stories in the hopes that others may not need to live in shame. I am deeply honored by the generosity required for Kennedy to share her vulnerability with me, and by extension, with all of you. I hope you feel it, and you honor her for it, too. In the first half of our episode, we discussed topics that have never before been broached on the podcast: childbirth and the sex thereafter, placenta fajitas, mismatched libidos, and being a young mother. In this second half of the episode, we discuss sexual assault. I name it that because that is its name. We also talk about getting married at 18 years old, emotional maturity, and my experience with her husband when I was in my 20s. Then Kennedy tells me a story about the first time she kissed a girl. I'm pretty sure you want to come lie down with us. I would, if I were you.
In some ways, I feel like I have sort of a jump on my peers, even though they are, a year ahead of me in their studies. I don't have the room to fuck up. Like, there's not room for me to be irresponsible in that department, because it's not just like my future riding on it. It is also, my child's. And
You're not messing around.
yeah. And I am grateful for that. And I think once I sort of got out of the trenches of the first year of motherhood, I really do feel like I started to wake up in a way that I hadn't expected to. And even just now being back in school, I feel, even though I'm like exhausted and our schedule is totally insane, I feel good and I feel like I can manage it because I have to. And I have one close friend from high school who has a full tuition scholarship and is sort of really struggling right now and floundering and failing classes. And she's very smart. Obviously she got a full tuition scholarship to a very good private college. But that's because I think she has the room to do that.
Or let's say the repercussions are not so stark or detrimental.
Yeah. And the only thing that is really riding on her end goal is herself. And that is just not true for me. And I do understand why some people would think that that is a bad thing. And I do understand when young parents talk about having some bitterness or resentment towards that part of their life. And I could feel bitter about it, and I could be resentful towards Thom or even towards, our child because of that. But I think instead I just need to process the loss of going through my 20s sort of, in that like blissfully unattached state. And I can instead of being resentful, I can use that energy to, be driven.
But here's the thing. For many of us, it was not blissfully unattached. And I knew Thom when he was in his 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he told you, but we slept together once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
Did he tell you?
Yeah.
And he was tortured. He was a really tortured soul. And the only thing that I remember him having any kind of bliss about was his creative life.
Yeah.
But he was tortured about that too, actually. He was just awash in self-recrimination and guilt and
self-loathing.
Self-loathing, flagellation. And I remember I wanted him to be my boyfriend. Like, I wanted to I remember that I got early 20s. I remember that I got this shirt, and it was like this plaid button-up shirt. It was very unlike what I would usually wear. And I was like, this is the shirt that I would wear if I were Tom's girlfriend.
And that's fucking weird because all I wear is plaid button-up shirts. I think I have like 30 flannel shirts.
And you look adorable in them, but I did not. It was not for me. It wasn't right for me. Anyway, I remember being in his apartment, and it was this sort of, it wasn't dirty, but it was like a hovel. It was like
Yeah.
dark and under, I think it was a basement, and I remember feeling the darkness, but I had a little draw to that. Like I thought that was kind of
He's, like,
enticing.
brooding and,
Yeah, I thought that was kind of
like, the
enticing.
angsty
Mhm.
sort of, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember giving him a massage and like running my breasts over his back and like enticing him, like seducing him. And I remember brushing my teeth in his bathroom and him saying that you could learn a lot about, and looking at my nails and saying you could learn a lot about someone by their nails. And what did you learn about me? And he wouldn't tell me. It was very, very strange. It was just all strange. And then I don't think he called me. He didn't like respond to other messages. He was super cagey. And then he had this sort of party line of no, I'm too damaged.
Yeah.
I'm too damaged for you.
I mean, Thom, even it still pulls that shit sometimes. I mean, not that it's unvalid in any way, because I understand where it's coming from.
Right, he has a history of trauma.
And not to say that all people going through their, young adulthood have this like very easy time by any means, because I think that life, no matter what your situation is, you're going to suffer. Like there's just suffering. And I guess I don't want to sound like I'm trying to say that suffering when you're unattached is any less valid than suffering when you
are beholden to someone or something.
I guess what I'm saying is, I just have the direct responsibility to someone who's not me. And I think, in a lot of ways it would allow me to spend more time, sifting through my own baggage. And
that's definitely true.
Yeah, and I think it's going to shift when our daughter becomes older and more self-sufficient, because then I think by the time that my parental responsibilities are, starting to dwindle, my peer group's parental responsibilities, if they do choose to have kids, will be just starting. And so I think it will, be the flip-flop that my 30s will probably be, probably I will have an onslaught of, sort of existential crisis.
Perhaps be a bit more carefree.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Or maybe not.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? Thom said yesterday that, he'll be married to you as long as you'll have him, basically, because he seems to have this pretty pragmatic take on the fact that you're not only going to be attracted to him for the rest of your life, and you certainly haven't had as many sexual experiences as he's had, and you might want to explore.
Yeah, so like I told you earlier, I dated, or more so I was more interested in females my own age rather than the bros that were in my school group. And that's not to say that, young men in my age group are all terrible, but some of them certainly are.
I don't know. I really felt like they were half human, like they weren't quite human yet.
Yeah.
And that's why I liked older men so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. And I felt the same way. But I did feel like, young women my own age were more so on the same level as me, as far as like, maybe not the same level as me, but just like they understood what being a young woman was. And I guess I related to them more. Just
Well, and
because of the sheer fact that they were also, young women.
And it's been said for a long time that emotional maturity develops faster in females. And it's likely that that's because it's how we're socialized.
Yeah.
And we're socialized to pick up emotional cues and to be more emotionally fluid.
Yeah.
I don't know that is scientifically based. It might be.
Well, I mean, most people can probably look just within their own life and see examples of that everywhere. I mean, my little brother was born when I was 7, so I was, already a child when he was just little baby. And I had sort of the perspective as he was growing older, and still do now because he's, a teenager now, comparing what my parents raised him like to what the ways they raised me.
How so?
Just as far as like even the repercussions of his actions and the way they treated him when he got emotional when he was young, things like that. And especially now that he's sort of really in the stage where he's pushing boundaries constantly, they don't do much about it because they just sort of, scoff and say, well, boys will be boys.
It's so hard to divorce it from our culture because what if we lived in a culture that prized emotional fluency in boys? I imagine they would develop it, right?
I imagine that there would probably be,
because there would be a social credit or a social reward for doing so, when right now, for the most part, there is a social sanction or a social penalty for being in touch with your emotions.
It's funny because even now, when my brother cries or gets upset in that way, it's almost like it makes my parents angry. And and I remember being that age and crying and getting emotional or upset about something, and my parents, it didn't faze them because it was just normal, because I was a girl, that I would cry or be upset about something.
Right. And those cues are picked up really, really early. That if your caregiver frowns when you have an emotional outburst as a child assigned male, let's say, you begin learning that it's not okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to be accepted. It's not going to get you what you want.
Yeah. And I remember being young, and I remember family members, when my mom would comfort my little brother when he was younger child, if he was upset about something, they would sort of turn their noses up and say that, what a mama's boy. And they would talk about how she was coddling him and that he wasn't ever going to learn if she treated his tantrums that way. And eventually, she stopped doing that. And I think it was interesting because I remember my little brother's emotional outbursts really intensifying after that. And I think it was probably because he was used to getting to a certain level and having my mom respond and comfort him. And then when that didn't happen, it got worse. Because he was like, okay, I need to take it up a notch to get
my needs met.
And I think that is probably very emotionally damaging and confusing for a child. It's just interesting to watch him, grow into a young man right now, because I'm sort of seeing some of the same issues start to surface. And, I love my brother dearly, obviously, but it's very frustrating because he's making decisions and doing things I don't think are necessarily healthy for a boy his age. And it's just being chalked up to him being a boy, and that there don't really need to be any repercussions, or he doesn't need to be talked to in any way about it, because he's just a young boy, and that's just what they do.
That is the kind of attitude that leads to rape culture, right?
Yeah.
Oh, boys will be boys. Oh, yeah, they harass other people, they hit other people. It's fine. They're just boys. That is so
Yeah.
dangerous.
So just watching that is very frustrating to me, obviously, because he's my little brother and I love him. But it's like watching this like slow descent into him becoming a person that I don't necessarily know if I'll want to have an adult relationship with. And it's hard because my parents, it's just like you said, the culture that it's like, oh, well, why would that matter? Boys will be boys. That's just what boys do.
What, I guess they're still together. What is your parents' relationship like between?
Oh, they're not together.
They're not together.
No. They got divorced when I was younger, because I lived with my,
Oh,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. And then when you were 14, went
I moved in with my dad.
to your father's.
And now my mom and dad have pretty much equal custody. Like 1 week my brother is with my dad, and 1 week he's with my mom. And my mom actually just got remarried this year to a man who's obviously not my father. And he's definitely loves Donald Trump.
Oh, boy. Okay.
So I think that's all I
That's
need to
all you
say
need to
about
say.
that.
So, when you went into your marriage, was it with an expectation of monogamy?
At the time, yes. Definitely at the time. I think being pregnant, my mind was not really anywhere but there, really. And I don't think Tom's was either. But as we have progressed out of that time, our sexual relationship has continued to grow and change. We have talked more about the reality of being monogamous for the long haul. And he has been very, candid with me about the fact that he doesn't think that that is practical, especially for me, because I am so much younger. And I hadn't even necessarily thought about it myself until he brought it up. And I do agree that I don't think that being monogamous for the rest of my life, especially being married to an older man, is practical, or that it would set up the conditions for our relationship to survive.
Yes, it seems highly unlikely. And I was talking with someone the other day and saying, well, what if, the spicy affair that someone had at work didn't have to be the thing that ruined your family?
Yeah. And we have talked at length about that on both sides of it, that I don't think that having a relationship outside of our marriage for either of us would necessarily be a fatal blow to our relationship. Because for each of us, it's less about the physical act of being with someone as it is about being honest with each other about the situation, and that any betrayal that would be felt would be because we had hidden something from one another. And so the expectation right now is that neither of us really have any time to think about dating or being with someone else. That's not to say that it couldn't just happen organically.
You never know.
Yeah. But Thom has said that right now what he's comfortable with would be me having a relationship outside of our marriage with another woman. And I understand that, and I'm okay with that. Mainly because I don't think where I am right now with myself, I would even really want to pursue another man. Just because I think, other than my husband, I am much more interested in other women than I am other men. And
it disappoints me in a small way, in that in one way I think this is much more likely to set you up for longevity. This awareness and this willingness to speak about the other, right? And desire outside of your union, I think it bodes really well, actually, for being able to sustain a relationship over a long period of time and being able to maintain a family unit that is respectful,
yeah.
and without deceit and betrayal. And I also completely respect people being able to check in with themselves and state their boundaries at the moment, and what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. But I've heard so many men say this, like, it's okay if you're with another woman, but don't you dare be with another man. And it seems to imply to me that being with another woman, like, wouldn't be a threat. It just wouldn't be real, because you're never going to leave him for another woman.
I think that is probably part of it, but he has also vocalized his worry about the likelihood of me leaving him to be with a woman.
I mean, which totally could happen.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is that, and it does happen.
Yeah, and I think right now I have said that I don't think I would be okay with him having a relationship outside of our marriage right now, because of mainly like my own insecurities, that I just have to be realistic about, that I am not in a space where I would feel emotionally safe with him being with either a man or a woman. Thom is a straight male, but even if he wanted to be with a man, I think I would also feel really insecure about that, because I am not a man. So I would also, feel like he was seeking something that I couldn't give him. But I think that that's also something that is okay. Like, it's okay that maybe there is something that your partner could or couldn't or wants or doesn't want to give you, and you wanting to fulfill that desire. And I think that in a secure relation, like, our relationship is secure in the fact that, we're being honest with each other about the way we're feeling. But if
it's
I
also
was
in its early stages.
Yeah. If I was, completely secure in myself, I would be like, oh, if there's something that I can't give you, then that's totally fine.
Yeah,
like,
but I don't know anyone who's completely secure in
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. But I would probably, I would support him and want him to go get that thing, and want him to, fulfill his desire and be happy with fulfilling it. And I'm just not to that point yet where I can say that I would want him to seek, especially a sexual relationship outside of ours.
The most successful open relationships that I've observed in my community from afar, right? I'm just seeing what I see, and I don't know what it's like on the inside. But the most successful ones that I have seen usually began closed, and began with the partners developing a really strong sense of trust and safety and comfort within their relationship, which is not to say that things can't throw curveballs and
Yeah.
alter the course of what you thought was going to happen, because life does that. But they opened it up after a long time, many years of being together.
Yeah.
5 years, 9 years, you
Yeah.
know? It's not a prescription, but it makes sense that you want to build
Yeah.
the relationship so that the ship is really sound, and then you go sailing knowing that there might be
Yeah.
some storms.
Yeah. And I think, you know, there's the cliche of like the 7-year itch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe if people were more realistic about the fact that they're probably going to feel that 7-year
Yes.
itch, then I think more relationships would probably survive for longer.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, Tom and I being honest with each other about that right now will be helpful for when, you know, we're at a point, or if we get to a point where we do want to open up our relationship. And I think that I do feel a sense of safety having had that discussion with him on multiple occasions, because I now know that, like, if there were ever to be anyone else, that we have the understanding that we would, you know, be honest with each other and talk to each other about it.
Yeah, which is more than many, many married couples have.
Yeah. So rather than being fearful of it happening, I can feel that if it ever were to happen, or when it happens, I will know about it and I will be able to process it that way, and we can discuss it and move forward with it as we see fit.
So what's the sex like?
It's pretty good. You know, having a baby throws things off for most couples, I think, and it definitely did for us. Obviously, because your body takes time to recover, but my expectation was that I was not going to feel like I would want to have sex, and Tom was going to be the one who was getting the short end of the stick. And it actually has ended up being the other way around.
Really?
Yeah, and it was causing a lot of tension up until more recently. And we talked about it, and I think it's because Tom and I both have, you know, pretty distinct sexual tastes. And
Now I want to know more.
So it was hard for Tom to sort of go over that line with me after, you know, watching me become the mother of his child, because he felt like, in a way, that, and we've talked about it, and it's obviously like some, you know,
Madonna whore thing?
well, he felt like it would be disrespectful to me that I should be like, you know, and he's had to like process it and work through it, because obviously that's bullshit. And he knows that, but it took him a minute to work through that and be able to, you know, not just like have sex and make love to me, but to be able to like fuck me again.
Yeah.
Because he felt that, in a way, you know, it would be disrespectful, I guess, to me as, you know, this like sort of, you know, Mother Mary magical woman on a pedestal.
Oh my God. And how many moms are just like, just fuck me?
Yeah, I think many. I think probably most moms. are
Probably
like that.
most. Yeah.
And I think that probably comes from this weird misconception that, you know, your wife should be like this, you know, beautiful, like pure
Ornament.
ornament, this trophy. And, you know, you should probably go fuck someone else, and that like
Right.
the any dirtiness in the bedroom would not be appropriate for the woman of the home.
Ugh. And then you have 500 million copies of 50 Shades of Grey sold to all the housewives in all the lands.
Yeah. I mean, when you put two and two together like that, I guess it just makes sense, because that book is not even that good.
It's not that good.
But
It's not particularly beautifully written
no,
or that accurate to BDSM anyway.
no, it's totally inaccurate
I
to
know.
BDSM from what I understand.
Yes, it's true.
But I think also being able to have a partner that you can have both with
Yeah.
also makes our relationship more sustainable.
That's
because-
what I would like. Absolutely.
Yeah, because, sometimes you do want that tenderness and that, intimacy, but then other times, you want it to just be fucking. You just want to have sex. You don't want there to be any, other strings attached to it. And you just want to have sex and go to bed. And that's okay too. And I think having that mutual understanding with each other has been very helpful. And going back to, his sex drive being lower than mine for a period of time was really hard, because I felt wounded in a way. And since we weren't necessarily talking about it directly, other than expressing frustration with one another, him being frustrated that I was wanting more than he was giving, and me being frustrated that I was, he wasn't giving what I wanted.
Or maybe also even frustrated at having to ask.
Yeah. I felt maybe it was because I wasn't appealing anymore.
Mm.
And obviously, you having talked about it and having worked through that, rough patch, that's not true, and that wasn't it. It was just, this sort of
Mental hang up.
yeah,
Conditioning.
yeah. And but things are definitely getting better now.
You said your sexual tastes, you had very distinctive sexual tastes.
Yeah, Thom is probably, as you know, very filthy. He loves just
Yeah.
filth. And I also love filth. And Thom is someone who prefers to be very dominant in most situations. And I think Thom is the first person who I really felt safe with to sort of succumb to my desire to be more submissive, because I didn't ever feel out of control. I didn't ever feel like I was giving up anything while giving into that desire.
Mm.
And, Thom has always made me feel very safe in that regard. And I think that's really what set him apart from other experiences I had had with other older men, is that I didn't ever feel completely secure in sexual situations with them. Not that I was ever taken advantage of. I just didn't feel like if I let myself, fall into that role, I felt like I would be giving up an amount of control. Because I think that is a struggle, is that there's, a power difference already
Yes.
with an older person.
Yeah.
And I think that can lead to someone being taken advantage of. And I have seen that happen with, friends of mine and other older men. But I think I just got lucky. I really think that I just flat out got lucky, and that the guy I dated before Thom turned out to be a real skis bag. And
Ooh.
actually, I think last year, getting arrested for flying a
Oh my God.
minor in from another state,
What?
which was very insane to me because he, from the get-go, was very adamant that like I was something that was, out of the ordinary, and that he hadn't dated anyone younger than him since he was in his very early 20s.
Oh, so he's a liar.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
And in the police report that one of my friends who knew I dated this man said to me, has
Oh.
said that from like going through his trail that he left of emails and text messages and calls, it seemed that it was almost a pattern of prostitution. So I really
Oh my God.
felt
Oh
some
my God.
like grossness and shame around that for a while, because I was like, okay, well, what number was I actually? Like, what was I actually to you?
And did you question what you were drawn to?
Yeah, totally. And I think it made me realize that, maybe my view of being a younger woman who, wanted to date older men was a bit of a pipe dream, because I think that there are older men out there who are actively seeking out women much younger than them, because the fact that sometimes they're, more naive and haven't
Yeah.
had as many, sexual experiences or even relationship experiences. So they're sometimes easier to take advantage of.
Yeah, and I have to confess to you, we were talking earlier about some of your friends ostracizing you and some of Tom's friends breaking with him or treating you poorly. And I have to confess that we have a housemate who also likes very young women and is in his 30s. And we would joke about it, but there was some judginess there. Like, why not date someone your own age?
Yeah.
But it's what he likes, right? It's actually part of his fetish life, is this youthful, girly, dirty girl.
Yeah.
And I wasn't pleased with how he treated some of his partners. And it sounded quite condescending to me a lot of times, and I was not okay with it. I did eventually tell him. And I was going to say that I was always kind to his partners, but actually, initially, his most recent ex, initially I wasn't kind to her because they took up a lot of space when they were together. And I live on a floor with six housemates live on my floor. And when they were together, it was like they were a couple living alone, and they like took over the kitchen, and they were super loud and really, really like kissy, and that's okay. You can be, I mean, I have a clothing optional house. You could fuck on the living room couch if you wanted to. We don't usually do that, but you could. It was more like the airwaves were clogged by them. So I think I resented that they were so loud and took up so much space. So at first I wasn't quite kind to her, and I also was questioning their dynamic. And questioning what he was doing, why he was drawn to her.
And I think that's totally valid, just because, of rape culture. And I think that that's probably where a lot of people's concerns lie with an older man being with a younger woman, is because the assumption is that he somehow took advantage of her. And oftentimes that is true. And I think that stereotype wouldn't exist if it hadn't been the case ever. And
yes.
And I think that is something that younger women who are interested in dating older men or who do want to date older men or are currently, actively seeking out older men have to be very wary of, because there are going to be fucking creeps. There are going to be dudes who just think that you're, this like living porn scene for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are going to be men who aren't that and who are maybe just at a point in their life where they're open to just any partner that has the same wants and needs as them, or not the same wants and needs, but is a good fit for them. And I think that is what happened with Thom, because Thom was very hesitant for a while before I wore him down, essentially. And I was very upfront with him about the fact that, I was actively seeking out older men and I wanted to date older men. And I had been dating older men. And he said that he was not open to dating someone as young as me, but he would be in my life in a way that he would be someone who I could have an open dialogue about my struggles or my concerns with that journey, and he could be sort of a sounding board for me. And I was obviously very attracted to Thom and wanted to date him, and I eventually convinced him to go on a date with me.
How long did that take?
It took about 2 months of just talking, either not even necessarily consistently, because we went through a period where we were talking pretty regularly, and then he sort of tapered off, probably because I was not easing up on my obvious want to have something more than a friendship with him. And when we did finally meet, it was very intense and very immediate, and we had crazy wild sex in the backseat of his car that night.
Yeah.
And it was actually the first time is really going to prove my age. It was the first time a man had made me come from oral in the backseat of his car.
Oh my God, that day for me was momentous.
Yeah, and I can safely say that it was totally different than any sexual experience I had ever had with a male. And I remember when when we started actually having, penetration, he was sitting up and I was on top of him facing him. And I remember feeling so safe and almost equal in a way that I hadn't ever felt while, having a man inside of me. And it was very, I think, sort of a formative point in my, sexual identity, realizing that you can really, be in control and be safe and be equal in a sexual experience with someone who is opposite to you, or just someone in general, really. And I think a lot of that stems from the first time I ever had sex was a very not necessarily consensual. And I think that
Are you saying that as a euphemism for rape?
essentially, yes. I still don't really like saying that. I don't like saying, that I am like a victim of sexual assault, because I think that I still have some, shit to work through with that, because when it happened, I lived in a very small town, and I confided in one person about it, and he confided in one person about what had happened, and eventually everybody knew, and then my dad found out about it, and charges were pressed, and he was prosecuted, and he's still, I think, facing the repercussions of that, because I was 13 and he was 16, and that is statutory rape in the state that I lived in. And that was enough to press charges with, even without the fact that it also was forced on me. And so that happened at the end of my 8th grade year. And then I remember starting my freshman year, and I remember a boy in my class came up to me, and there was no precursor to this. He just said to me, "Hey, did you get raped last year?"
Whoa.
Yeah. And it was like almost like jokingly, like he was like poking fun at it. And so I think that really sort of set up the way I felt about having sex with men for a while after that. And I think it did. I sort of acted out sexually for a little bit. I think just because I was trying to prove to myself that I could be in control. The fact of the matter was that I really wasn't, because I was just having sex with these essentially boys who saw me as an easy target for that reason. And
I imagine many women are hesitant to use the word rape for what happened to them, that when they speak it to someone is clearly rape, sexual assault, because the word victim is so terrible. Nobody wants to be considered or consider themselves a victim. It just doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel empowered to say I'm a victim. Although many women have been able to turn that around, right, and claim that as a survivor, right? I'm a survivor. And that's a bit of powerful language that I know many people who use that language and are able to claim it in a way that feels empowering to them. But to be a survivor, you have to have undergone a trauma.
yeah.
And the truth is that it's still, even with some landmark cases, right, where 50 women have come forward against a figure, a celebrity, still there is just a tremendous amount of victim blaming. And so if you say, I've been a victim, then it's so likely that you'll be blamed.
Well, and I think I was, and I think I blamed myself even more so. And it was because, we were doing other things. We were making out and, having oral and feeling each other up and stuff. And we had a couple times before it happened. And so when it happened, I was sort of like, well, I guess that's just it. I guess that's just like what happens. And I remember telling my mom about it, and my mom sort of had the same attitude as I did, that like, what else were you doing? And I told her, and she was like, well, okay then. Like thinking that somehow I had like, and I think that really took me, up until, just, 2-3 years ago to really feel like it wasn't my fault. And another thing was that when he was, finally found guilty of this, my mom talked about how she felt so sorry for him because this was going to be something that was going to follow him
Oh my God.
for the rest of his life.
Right. because it's not going to follow you for the rest
Yeah.
of your life. Oh, it's so awful. And that's rhetoric that I read in the newspapers all the time. And it should be self-evident. But just because you're willing to do one sexual act with someone does not mean you're willing to do another. If I allow you into my pussy, that does not mean you are welcome into my ass. It doesn't. You have to have consent for all of the acts.
Yeah. And I think that was something that I really didn't understand, I guess. And so when, my attempts to stop the situation and my, vocalization that I did not want to do this was just ignored. And then I told my mom about that. And because I had been doing other stuff, it somehow made the latter okay,
In their eyes, which is ridiculous.
And like I said, it took me a long time to work through that. And it really took me a while to understand that, my own advances to be sexual with other boys after that was a direct result of me really feeling like I didn't have control. And I think that there are probably, of course, yes, there are, women who still feel like they don't have control. And it took me years, and it is still something that I have to check in with myself about, because like I said, I don't like using the word rape or using the word sexual assault or using the word victim, because I think that there are so many connotations with that somehow if you are a victim, it's your own fault.
It's a tragedy. It's a travesty in the society that it's like that. It's such an emblem of the fact that this culture hates women. It's so painful.
And I think I didn't realize really how prominent the issue was until, because like I said, I confided in that one person, and then of course that spread like wildfire. And then, he was still a minor when the charges were pressed, but because he was older, they released his name in like the local paper and the local radio, and everybody knew that we had been together or whatever, as much as young people can be in a relationship or whatever.
Right.
So of course, people knew that I was the person that he had done this to. And because when I moved in with my dad, shortly after all this happened, I switched schools, and it was far enough away that, it was still very small. It was a little bigger than my previous high school, actually. Somehow 65 kids in my graduating class was bigger, but not.
It's okay.
People didn't know that had happened to me because I was treated very differently, especially by the girls.
Ugh.
Because again, it was I remember getting called a slut and stuff. And even I remember getting called a slut. I remember I probably still get called a slut. And I think that somehow I really internalized that for a long time, because I was like, oh, wow, all of this is my own fault. And I would be sexual with these other people, and then I would immediately feel terrible about it after. And I think that is something that is, deeply embedded in us from a very young age.
Internalize is the word that I was going to use also, because the women, or the young girls rather, who called you a slut, that comes from internalized hatred towards women and internalized fear of female sexuality.
Yeah. And it took me a long time to understand all that, because when you're young, of course you just don't. And it took me, therapy and talking to my therapist regularly for, basically my whole high school career to work through a lot of that. And I remember then when I voiced my interest in women, which I had been interested in women before that even happened to me. I remember making out with other little girls when I was like a little child and loving it, And I remember having like the biggest crush on my 4th grade teacher, who was a woman. And finally, when I voiced that to my parents, it was almost like they were like, okay, that's just because, you went through this thing.
Right. You were traumatized by men, therefore
that's why you're interested
you want women.
Yeah. And, my mom was definitely, more nonchalant about it than my dad was. My mom had said that. And then later my mom had said that the only problem she had with that is that she wanted to have grandchildren. And, and my dad really didn't believe me. And I remember him straight up telling me, he's like, well, you're making a choice. And I think that is as a result of his own religious upbringing. And
one of those.
Yeah. And, that's not to say, like, I love my father dearly. Like, he is a man of incredible integrity, and we have a very close relationship. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have his hang-ups. And this is definitely one of the bigger ones. And I remember then being like him saying that it was my own choice sort of, reverberated back to all the shame and guilt I felt about what had happened and how somehow that was my fault. And somehow now not only was this, assault my fault, but me being interested in women was not only wrong, but it was my fault.
Oh.
And
it's so much to carry.
Yeah. And something that is very great about growing up with the immediate and easy access to, this huge other, online world is that I had access to other people that weren't in my area that were like me or that, understood me, or even just, access of people who were different from the norm of, small town Midwest, and them being like okay and good people, because somehow, if you're different, it's probably because you're bad in a lot of, small communities. And it was so strange because as time went on and I dated another girl who lived in the same area as me, and we were somewhat public about it, people found out that I also liked women, and somehow that made me, more of a slut.
Right.
But then it, of course, didn't make me any less interesting to boys.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it was like, it was something else to target. And
right.
I remember.
Can you bring one of your girlfriends
Yeah,
around?
yeah. And I remember being out one night just with a group of people with my girlfriend at the time. And people just being like, well, kiss. Well, kiss if you're really dating then, because we don't
Oh.
believe you. And stuff like that. And just,
Ugh.
weirdness about it being like this super interesting and hot thing, but at the same time being totally not valid in any way.
Imagine them telling a heterosexual couple, well, kiss.
Yeah.
Kiss on demand. Kiss because we want you to.
That just doesn't happen.
Well,
And
because nobody gets to mandate that. That's just so
Yeah.
fucking ridiculous.
And I think
Ugh.
that having access to, like an online community really is what saved me from a lot of, not that I don't have trauma from all of these things, but that saved me from having really intense, deep-rooted trauma that would really hinder me in a way that is more severe than it has.
Then might keep you from having the relationship you're having now.
Yeah. And I guess I'm just really grateful for that. And really, people love to talk shit about millennials, but I'm so grateful to be one, because I feel like our generation is sort of at the forefront of paving a way for people who are different. And I think having access to people who had a platform to speak out about that really saved me in a lot of ways.
Where was it that you found that, or that you found that support?
Yeah, just like, finding gay couples on Instagram or other gay women on Instagram, or, even just like going on Reddit and the, the forums on Reddit, and just, access to Google and being able to like look shit up that I didn't understand necessarily was really my saving grace in a lot of ways. And I mean, what you're doing right now is, sort of a great example of that, 50 years ago, people were still pretty much the same as we are now. People were still gay or trans or non-binary, or, people were still, misogyny was even more rampant then. So people were still experiencing all of the same things that we're experiencing now. It just wasn't talked about, and there was no access to any information on it.
Solidarity.
Yeah. And I think that is something that my generation really has to be grateful for, because I can't imagine going through, a sexual trauma 50 years ago, or, feeling attracted to women 50 years ago, because that would be crazy, that you wouldn't be able to do anything about it, like you wouldn't even be able to talk about it to anyone, I don't think. And
well, with great caution and perhaps great repercussions.
Yeah, exactly. And it was seen as, people are still shitty to people who are different from them. But, I wasn't like, I never felt like I was unsafe. I never felt like someone was going to like kill me or hurt me or beat me up or something because of my sexuality. And that is probably also because, I'm a female. There was one gay male in high school with me who was out, and he was bullied by the other boys, but mostly widely accepted by the females. But I think that that also shows how it is still harder because of toxic masculinity to be an out. I shouldn't say harder, but the experience is different for gay men, because
it's not seen as threatening, so it doesn't inspire the same kind of violence.
Yeah. And I remember he was on the basketball cheerleading team, And I remember so many people, even like parents, were boycotting games because there was
Oh my
a
God.
gay boy on a gay cheerleader. And I think that if I had been a cheerleader, and it was, it was, like I said, a small community, so I'm sure parents were getting the gossip too. But I don't think that if I had been a cheerleader that anyone would have
I can't
boycotted
imagine them boycotting the
Yeah.
game.
And
Kennedy, you have a story for me?
I remember the first time I kissed a girl was when I was 15. And so you have traveled through a lot of the Midwest by, a car now. So you've seen the huge wind turbines, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like these insanely huge, monstrous windmills that are just out in the middle of nowhere in a lot of rural areas. And for some reason, they're not like blocked off. You can just drive up to them. So I was with this girl, and we were we're like out just walking around on these gravel roads and by these cornfields. And that was the first time I had ever been up to one. And when you stand under one, it's really exhilarating and sort of equally horrifying because it looks like it's going to swing down at you. And if you've ever seen, you've probably seen the blades of these like being transported on the highway. They're just, they're the size of, tall buildings. And that was the first time I ever kissed a girl, was under a wind turbine in a cornfield. Yeah. And it was great. It was awesome. I think of that fondly now. And another thing is that Thom, for our first date, he bought me my first vibrator. He brought it to me as a gift because we had talked about masturbation and how important, especially as a woman, it is to know what you like and what feels good to you. And he had asked me if I had ever masturbated with a vibrator, and I said no, I've never had a vibrator. And so he brought me one.
Aww.
So that I could get myself off.
That is very thoughtful.
Yeah. He's a good man.
The end.
The end. And that's what's horizontal.
This episode of Horizontal was edited by Chad Michael Snavely, whose coterie of podcasts are available on chadmichael.com. My lovely intro music was created by the nicest rock star on the planet, Alan Markley, Plastic Cannons on the Instagram. The flirtatious character illustration of me and my cover art was drawn and graphic designed by Shauna Shea, SHANA SHAY. Find her on 99 Designs. In gratitude to my loyal listeners, I've been reading one of the lovely 5-star reviews that Horizontal has received at the end of each episode. This one, by question mark, is particularly velvety and thoughtful. It is entitled Masterful, Intimate, and Delightful, and it goes like this. This will be the first iTunes review I have ever written, but in this case I find myself compelled. Horizontal with Lila is quickly becoming one of my favorite podcasts. I discovered it because a close friend of mine was a guest on one of the episodes, and even in the show's infancy, currently 4 episodes in, it's been a welcome discovery. And not just welcome, but impactful. I hope the show will be around for a long time to come. Lila is masterful at what she does, which is to create a safe and intimate space for guests to join her and have personal, sensual, and far-reaching conversations around the most delicate experiences from their lives. There are currently many other podcasts dealing with the topic of sexuality, but this one has a presence, an immediacy, a heart, a delight, and an authentic curiosity to it that I think sets it apart. Horizontal takes some of my favorite elements from other shows like The Heart, Death, Sex, and Money, and even Risk, and expands on them. At the center of the show is Lila herself, of course. Her velvet voice is soothing and sultry. It puts one at ease, and yet one gets the feeling that beneath the warm questions, there is a searching zeal that won't relent. In particular, I was delighted with the way Lila doesn't just breeze through topics with her guests, but rather circles around those topics and those questions, returning time and again until it feels she has really drawn her guests out and given them the opportunity to plumb the depths of their stories, should they choose to. Not many hosts take the time to do that quite so naturally or so intentionally. The conceit of the show is brilliant as well, recording the exchange while lying down together. It brings an unguarded quality to the conversation that I find rare in produced content, and feels like we, the audience, are being invited to eavesdrop on a couple's private pillow talk. It seems that in pretty much every way, Horizontal with Lila is a gift. Give it a listen. I think you will find it's worth your time. ? What a glorious, lush, thorough review. Thank you for that energy and that time and the gift of your listening. Until next week, dear ones, may you have someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. Thanks for lying down.
I think I was just like trying not to get too up in your space.
No, that's exactly the point. You're supposed to get up in my space.